like, well, if parks remain open, we can put up story walks and kind of put more attention. And so there's been, yeah, and just I've gotten a huge number of inquiries about librarians trying to get story walks up and going now since their
Mhm.
facilities are closed. But then also just a huge explosion in virtual programming and of all sorts. And one of the biggest ones is actually cooking programs. A lot of libraries have wanted to do cooking programs for a while, but they don't have the health certification or whatnot. So they felt like they couldn't do it. But now with the libraries being closed, you don't need to have a health license to do a cooking class from your home kitchen.
Ah,
So
okay, right,
there,
right.
so it's kind of like now librarians that had wanted to do this for a while are all of a sudden trying it out because of just it's been interesting. So it'll be, and then the last thing is that a lot of librarians have been doing outdoor programming. So as virtual programming is kind of ramped up, there's been just a huge number of librarians across the country. So I don't need to be in my, I don't know, children's room to do my story hour or whatnot. I can do it like outside. So doing like a story hour in the woods, or
Mhm.
especially in more rural areas, there's been librarians who have done story hours with like sheep and goats and cows.
Yeah.
And so I think the long-term implications, I mean, I think when this all settles out, I think we'll see a lot more librarians continue to do cooking programs and continue to do kind of outdoor-based programming. It's like,
Mhm.
because I think they're like now just out of necessity, they've had to rethink what they do, and I think it's gonna have some real profound implications going forward.
You think in a good way, like it'll help them offer things they would not have thought to do
Yeah, I mean
before?
that's my hope. I mean that's yeah. I mean there's obviously a lot of uncertainty right now, but that's my hope, is that
Mhm.
it's gonna lead them to really be even more thinking outside the box in terms of what a library program can look like.
Mhm.
I mean, the more dystopian possibility is that there'll be just a huge number of libraries that close and don't reopen, which is
Mhm.
because a lot of library staff are now being furloughed because of anticipated reductions in property taxes. Not so much here in North Carolina,
Mhm.
but Ohio has been especially hard hit. Like a lot of I mean, almost the entire staff of the Dayton and Akron libraries have been laid off. I think the only library in North Carolina that it's affected has been Morehead City. All the
Mhm.
library staff have been furloughed. But most libraries have continued to keep their staff on payroll, and they're doing things remotely.
Mhm.
And then in some places, they're actually, so I mean, librarians in North Carolina are either city or county employees, so they're being
Mhm.
redeployed for other city or county agencies. So
Okay.
in Cabarrus County, like I was talking with a librarian who's actually now working for the Parks Department, and she's being tasked to go and clean up parks and things like that. So I don't, yeah, it's been, I mean, everything is very up in the air right now, but yeah, I've been trying to stay connected and stay plugged into what people are doing and trying to do. And yeah, but it's been interesting anyway. Yeah, but that's but lots of innovation kind of
Mhm.
emerging out of this.
That's really nice to hear. Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe this moves us a little bit toward the innovation talk that I wanted to have with you. But when you talk about libraries, I'm always struck by you almost seem like, like an anthropologist that goes in and studies a group and
Yeah.
says, how do they live? What do they do? How do they adapt? What's
Hmm.
emerging in this
Um,
culture? And you always seem to have your finger on the pulse of kind of
hmm.
what's happening out there in America, at least in
Yeah.
the US, around libraries. Do you think of it that way?
Kind of implicitly. I mean, that's kind of my training. I mean, my dissertation was on ethnography, and I did a number of classes on kind of ethnography, and so that's and yeah. So I guess I hadn't thought of it explicitly in that way, but that's a big part of my kind of training as a social scientist.
Hmm. Hmm. And yeah, because one of the questions I had, and see, my hope for this conversation is that down the road, if there was a faculty member or student or somebody thinking about if they wanted to do some innovation work, it might be helpful to hear a little bit about somebody else's journey, right? Of how they got into it and what they learned from it, knowing that the content could be very different based on what somebody was doing. But you talked about this a little bit one time, but I don't quite remember the whole story. But if you were to say, like, how did you get to where you are now? What was the process or the journey you've been on? Now you have a pretty developed idea and a developed innovation work, but if I'd have talked to you, I don't know, maybe in your doctoral program,
Hmm.
were you
Hmm.
thinking about these health programs even then?
I was starting to. So I mean, in my doctoral program, I was focusing much more on digital inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was doing, I mean, this is kind of, I mean, I think one of the benefits of qualitative research, because I was doing kind of a lot of field work in senior centers that had computer programs. I was spending just a lot of time in senior centers, and that led me to see a lot of the fitness programs that they were offering, and kind of see how they were structured, and yeah, just the benefits of people coming in to, I don't know, do like they did like video based Zumba and things like, or chair based. So anyway, and just thinking about like, I mean, just looking at these things and thinking, I mean, these could easily be offered in like a public library meeting room. And then, yeah, kind of, and then after I finished that, just starting to think about, I mean, is this already happening? And I mean, that was kind of, and finding out that it was. And so, I don't know if that, yeah, I mean, so I was kind of like in the back of my head, but it wasn't at the
Mm-hmm.
foreground, but it was really just based on that piece of really kind of just paying attention to what's happening. And
Mm-hmm. So you
um,
started more interested in digital inclusion, but by doing that research in libraries, it
mhm,
led you to notice that they were starting to do health programming with seniors.
mhm, mhm.
Okay. And for anybody who was listening to this, like, maybe you could just give a quick overview of like what exactly is the innovation work that you're doing and this initiative that you've created to sort
Yeah,
of tie that back to how you got there.
yeah, that's good. So I would say that, I mean, really the innovation piece of my work is focused on how do we best support public librarians that are interested in this topic, but it's something new to them. They're not really sure where to get started. Kind of, they're looking for resources, looking for advice from other librarians who have been doing this for a while or are starting to do it. So really thinking about what kind of peer-to-peer support network would be needed to kind of move this innovation from kind of something that just takes place idiosyncratically and in particular locations to something that's kind of a national or even international movement. So really thinking about how do we kind of harness or support or catalyze kind of grassroots innovation, such that it doesn't simply remain um, locked or isolated in a particular location, but spreads widely. So
Mm-hmm.
finding something that's working well in particular places and kind of spreading that.
Mm-hmm. So do you remember, and I know it's been a couple of years now, but do you remember when you first started thinking about, wow, there's these interesting and unusual health-based programs that are happening in libraries?
Hmm.
Was your question like, how widespread is this? Like, is this a new emerging phenomena? I'm curious how, when you first ran into this, what was your curiosity about it?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the initial question, was how widespread is this? Kind of what's the history of it? So those were probably the two first questions, how widespread is it and what's the history of it? And so those were the two kind of research articles that I wrote back in 2016 and early 2017. One was a survey of libraries in the US and Canada that we ended up getting about well, it was 1,157 usable responses from libraries throughout the US and Canada. And those were all libraries that reported basically doing some variant of this programming. So these were 1,157 self-identified libraries that said, yes, we are doing this, and here's what it looks like. So kind of a self-selecting sample, but nonetheless one that indicated the spread and widespread nature of the phenomenon. And so then the other first research article was really more looking at kind of, it was a literature review / history. So here's what's been written about this already. I think the oldest citation I could find was an article in Connecticut from the early 1990s about a librarian who teamed up with a local aerobics instructor. It was called Sweat and Self-Esteem, kind of a program focused on promoting health among teenage girls in particular. So it had some fitness components, it had some mental health components, just a lot of different things to really tap into the power of public libraries as kind of a safe space for self-discovery. So yeah, so I mean that's so I mean it did start kind of as a peer research project. I hadn't really thought about when it started. How can I kind of play a more catalyzing role in the profession in terms of spreading ideas and providing support? It was really just how widespread is this and where did it come from were the two kind of orienting questions. But then as I did that and talked more with librarians, particularly in North Carolina, that was the third study. So there was the U.S. Canada survey, the kind of lit review historical piece, and then the third kind of research project that I did in 2016, 2017 was an interview-based study with 39 public librarians across the state. We're doing some variant of this programming and basically just open-ended interviews. How did you get started doing this? What have your challenges? What have been the outcomes? And really, especially in that interview-based talking with librarians, I really heard that I mean, people were really feeling like they were just kind of making it up as they went along. I mean, I remember one called it a trial by fire, and so just feeling like they were doing it, but didn't really feel like they were doing it as part of something larger or anything like any coherent regional or national movement that was just kind of spontaneously emerging. Was kind of the feeling that the librarians that I talked with kind of communicated. And so that kind of led me to think about, so what could I do, or what would be a way to provide support for librarians that are already doing this, but then also use that as a platform to inspire and support librarians interested in getting started. And what would they need to get something going in their particular locations?
Yeah. So if I say that back to you, it because I hope that other people could relate to this. Like you saw by doing qualitative research, by sort of having that ethnographic perspective, that this phenomena is out there. People are doing these health-based programs in libraries, which is somewhat unusual. And you began to look at it as a researcher and just investigate that. Like, what is it? How many of them are there? Like, how are these things put together? Whatever those questions might have been, surveys, as you mentioned. And that led you to really the question, which is probably what got you and I talking initially, is there something that I can do to help catalyze, I think you said, and provide a place for these folks to support one another? Was that the original idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Support one another and kind of share successes, share challenges. So really the idea that like successes and challenges would not be celebrated or endured in isolation, but could be shared and kind of troubleshooted together or celebrated together, as the case may be.
And maybe you could say a little bit about, the site that you created and how that was designed to meet that need you just stated.
Yeah, so the site, the original iteration of the site kind of had really, I would say, two main components. So one of the major components, which is really focused on program ideas, so providing librarians with kind of here are kind of some vetted kind of vetted resources on how to get started with particular types of programs. So say you want to do like a yoga class at your library, here's some articles that have been written by other librarians about how they got started doing a yoga class that you can use to get this started at your library. Or here's how we got started doing kind of a walking program and or what have you. So thinking about kind of, because what I was finding is that more and more librarians were especially doing conference presentations about the different programs that they were doing. And so, and yeah, and also in like state library periodicals. So really doing a lot of deep diving, capturing a lot of this, I guess you could call it gray literature, professional how-to based literature, kind of trying to collect those resources and put them together in a usable format for librarians. So that was one major part of the website. The other major part was the kind of the where libraries move, which was more trying to and succeeding and basically creating a platform for librarians that were offering different programs to kind of share what they were doing. So you could click on a particular state or province in Canada and say, here's the libraries that are doing things, here's exactly what they're doing. So hopefully, so if you were, say, a librarian in Montana, you could go and see, here are the other librarians in Montana doing things, and kind of get some help librarians, get some peer-to-peer support, but then also just having kind of a national or U.S. Canada portrait of kind of here's everything that's going on. So kind of I guess a testament to the widespread nature of this phenomenon for anyone that was interested in kind of working with libraries to move this along.
So,
And that I know that was used and continues to be used. I mean, the one example that comes to mind, there was a librarian in Maine who wanted to start a fitness collection. So things like kettlebells and dumbbells that she could check out from the library. And she used the map to kind of identify other libraries that were checking out fitness equipment, and then contacted those librarians in Minnesota and Georgia and a few other places to get some ideas so that she could then have get this idea off the ground and actually get it moving, and it is now. She got a small grant, regional grant, I think, of a few $1,000s to get it going, and
so in a way, like the innovation, if someone isn't familiar, like on that Let's Move in Libraries site, you've got a map of the U.S. People can look at any place in the U.S. and kind of click on that state and figure out in that region what programs exist related to health, and they can then contact those libraries or those librarians, and that's the peer-to-peer support, right? They share resources and ideas. What worked and didn't.
And that's that has definitely been part of the peer-to-peer support, and after the website kind of got going, then we started doing more on social media, and that's really and there's been a huge amount of peer-to-peer support through that as well.
Can I ask you about that? Because that was one question I had written down that as an observer, I thought you've done a particularly good job of, was, you created the website, but you didn't just create a website and stick it up there in the world and like let people find their way to it accidentally. So I'm curious, like, how do you think about using social media and social networking to grow this Let's Move in Libraries?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an integral component. I mean, I think I know, and I mean, it's social media is a place where librarians turn for advice and input from other librarians. I mean, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, in particular, and so just knowing that these are spaces where librarians are already kind of turning for advice and seeking input, it just made sense to kind of make sure that Let's Move in Libraries were in these spaces and active, sharing information and kind of reposting what libraries were doing. I mean, it just made natural.
Made sense.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I've always noticed talking to you, and I sometimes feel this with your other colleagues, you all seem to be so comfortable in this space because y'all teach a lot about
Mhm.
digital access to information and
Yeah.
whatever. But I can imagine somebody, if they were listening to this, going, but they wouldn't exactly know how to think about using social media as a way to promote
Mhm.
an
Mhm.
innovative idea. But I heard you say, you had Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you were, I guess, letting people, seeing what people were already doing, reposting some of that on your
Mhm.
site.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, how did you think about driving people towards your social media outlets, though, and toward the website? And I mean,
Mhm.
what did you do to do that?
Um, I mean, I think one probably, I mean, one of the main things, I think it was around 2017, I started setting up these Google News alerts for things like gardening in public libraries or yoga public libraries, what have you. And so you can set up these Google, so anytime content on the web gets published that uses certain keywords, you'll get an email notification. So I think, and the number of keywords has kind of grown over the years, but it's basically a daily digest of new content that I can skim through, and so if there's kind of an interesting story. I mean, today I just remember the one I found today in Milford, Connecticut. The library was talking about how they just added a new story walk. So just reminding people that even though the library is closed, you can check out this park and or this story walk in this local park. So just as kind of so that's, I mean, that's been a great way to kind of just make sure that there's always new content coming out. Kind of yeah, looking through these Google News alerts and kind of
Mhm.
sharing stories.
So you'll find those things and put them out on your social media.
Yeah,
Just as a
yeah.
quick connect to the story to give
Yep.
information.
Yeah,
Yep.
connect to the story, and that's and as I've done that consistently, like it doesn't happen all the time, but I think more and more kind of then librarians will be sharing things with me because they know that I'm looking for these things and reposting them. So
Mhm.
what's I'm trying to think of a recent example. I got an email from Elgin, Illinois, where they, and at Elgin, Illinois, the library is working with this local Activate Elgin, it's called. I don't know if it's public health or parks. Anyway, it's like, but it's focused on increasing physical activity in Elgin. And now that the library is closed, they just released this video that's kind of basically simple things you can do to stay moving at home during the pandemic. So it was a video that they had made with Activate Elgin, and the librarian there just emailed me that. So I think as I've kind of, I think as more and more people realize that I'm kind of consistently posting these innovative programs, more and more people are kind of emailing me or sharing them with me or using our hashtag on Instagram. So
And weren't you going to build your like the new version of the Let's Move in Libraries website to have sort of these current news
yes,
or more
yes.
of that kind of
Yeah,
information?
that's absolutely going to be a huge part of it. So the making sure that we have kind of up more current content both on the homepage, as well as one we're kind of totally redoing the Let's Move stories. So we had what had been just a web page of kind of stories of innovations and libraries, and we're redoing that so that it'll be kind of yeah, kind of a tile structure. So you click on Let's Move and stories, and it would have just a bunch of just basically small blocks that would have a picture and just like 1 or 2 sentence overview of the story that you would then click on to learn more.
Hmm.
And that'll make it easier to, not all the time, but my hope would be like on a monthly basis have a new story and this new
Yeah.
structure that would enable. Um, yeah, so I mean, I was just thinking today, and I was emailing the web design people that we're working with. So I think that's going to make a big difference because I was just
Hmm.
thinking, like when I was talking with the advisory board the other day, I had mentioned there's this library in New Hampshire that created what they called a fitness forest behind the library, where they just had a story walk, but then in between the pages of the storybook, they had like, all right, do 20 jumping jacks or whatnot.
Yeah, you're right, right.
Like, and so, so they called it the fitness forest. And the librarians I was talking to were really excited and wanted more information. And so I pointed them to, like, I posted it on Instagram, and the librarian gave me a lot of information about how they set it up. But there really wasn't like a really great place to put that in an easy way into the current iteration of the website. So with the design, there'll be it'll be a more natural place to kind of put these stories, into the structure of the website in a more natural way that hopefully people will be able to see kind of contemporary innovations more easily.
That's awesome. So one way maybe to think about what you've created, it strikes me it's like a clearinghouse or a consortium that says, if you're interested in health-based programs and libraries, we're the place that you can find them, you can connect around them, share information around them. Like it's like become the hub out of which a lot of people go to. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. And especially the share thing. That's one thing we're really trying to emphasize with the revisions, that this is a place for you to share your story. I mean, we kind of had that a little bit in the older version. We wanted people to like share what they were doing on the map and whatnot. But what we were finding was a lot of people just wanted to share their story. And we didn't really have, I mean, we kind of, it wasn't as kind of as directly communicated to people as I think it could have been, that we wanted this to be a place for you to share your story. But I think with the new revisions, that's going to hopefully be communicated more clearly. And I anticipate that it will become a more dynamic place where librarians will go to look for information, but they will also look for a place to kind of share what they've been doing and trying out.
Yep. That makes me to a question I was thinking about. As an outsider who's heard you talk about this, you seem to have had a lot of, like, if you were able to find the problem or find the need that was out there in the world, like this is happening, how can we help people get supports around these sorts of programming. It's very grassroots in that you're actually going to the people doing it and helping them communicate what they're up to. I was thinking of the question, like, when you tell the success of something that you have done, any of us, it sounds like, well, gosh, that was great and really easy, and he just like moved right through it. And in my world, it may not be that direct, and it just, I always think that there are some hurdles, challenges, things you try that maybe don't work as well when you're doing innovation work, but you have to just keep that iterative mindset. I don't know if you've had thought about this, but if there are things that you thought, well, that didn't particularly go like I thought it would, but I've just sort of had to work around it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, even though, I mean, I think and so, I would say, I mean, the one challenge or one thing that did not work kind of as much as I had hoped it would, although it did work a little bit, was the map that we did. So the Let's Move in Libraries map. I think that worked well for a brief period of time and continues to work well with kind of a testament to kind of the widespread nature of this phenomenon. But in terms of kind of a dynamically updated directory, it hasn't really fulfilled that. I think it's just logistically it's pretty complicated, and kind of think about maintaining that. And
so are you doing away with that?
I'm not doing away with it, but we're moving it down and kind of the left sidebar, and kind of saying that making it clear that we encourage people to send us updates, but it really relies on what information that people send us, and so we can't. And I think the other thing we had, so in that map, in the first iteration, we got really specific about, like, every Tuesday night at this library they have such and such program, and that's also, I mean, so moving away from things that are so specific and more generally saying, so you may have something like I don't know, the High Point Library regularly offers yoga classes and hosts the town farmers market, and so without kind of going into specifics, so that's a little bit more general. But but yeah, I mean, I think that that map it worked well, but not it didn't kind of work exactly the way that I had hoped it would. I mean, after we got it set up and kind of put up there. Yeah, we weren't getting a lot of updates, and what I've gotten a lot more of is less updates on the map and more kind of librarians kind of just wanted to share something new that they're doing, or kind of like send me a couple paragraphs about we did this or that.
Yeah.
And so a lot more of those stories, and that's kind of where so I learned, okay, the map is maybe not exactly what we need. Although I mean, I think it serves a certain function, but what I was really hearing is that the librarians just want to kind of share what they've been up to, and also see what other librarians have been up to in a more kind of narrative
Real
type
time
structure.
kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
And did I got the feeling like once you started saying that, it helped me remember how you were saying that, you know, you're constantly getting these people just reaching out spontaneously and saying, hey, this is what we've done. Just
Yeah.
wanting to let people know.
Yeah, yeah. They just want
this is what we're
let people
doing.
know. Yeah, yeah. And they don't feel like they're, and that's and I think that does speak to the need that this fills, because I mean, I think people are reaching out to me because there's no real other natural place to reach
Yeah.
out to.
Yeah, you're the one,
Yeah,
which is really kind of neat. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, I don't know if you can think about it this way, because like I said before, I get the feeling that you are so comfortable in this landscape of using these processes to help people communicate, the digital processes, because that's what you're trained in. But does anything come to mind if you were to say, you know, if we take this out of libraries, we take this out of your field of study, if somebody was thinking about innovation, but they're a teacher education person or a counselor or they're a special educator or whatever they might be, they won't necessarily have this same set of skills, certainly not as well as you do. That we could certainly say that probably is the case. But do you think of any, like, and this may be a hard question, Noah, so if you didn't go anywhere, that's cool. But do you think of any themes or patterns, or like, here's the kind of thing you probably ought to think about or be conscious of if you're trying to take an initiative and grow it, scale it, make it bigger? Like, what are the kind of things people ought to be pondering? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, and I think, and I don't know how applicable this would be to other sectors, but I think what's worked for me has really been to kind of cast a broad net, or pitch a big tent. So have something that a lot of people can kind of latch onto. So I mean, it would be, I mean, I'm imagining it would be a very different project if I said this project is exclusively focused on programs involving yoga and libraries, let's say. Like, it'll be very narrow, very kind of a niche thing, and it would kind of have some constraints on the types of innovations that librarians could do. But I think by casting a broad net, kind of pitching the project widely, it's something that a lot of people can kind of hang their hats on and kind of make their own, which has worked really well for us. And that's, I mean, that's one thing I think really makes a big difference, is that if you're trying to spread innovation, or really even think about the diffusion of innovation, for the innovation to spread, there has to be mechanisms for people to make it their own. You can't just kind of like take one thing and like lockstep march it throughout the country. Like, that's not how the diffusion of innovation works. There has to be ways for people to kind of like organically and authentically kind of take something and make it their own. And in the process of that diffusion, like, it's going to be transformed. It's not going to stay the same. I mean, and so that goes back to even reader response theory, which is way back in kind of my early training in literature. And so yeah, when someone reads a book, it becomes their story. It's no longer the story of the author. It's now the story of the reader. And that's, I mean, that's kind of like a core part of how I think about the world. When you take an idea and try to spread it, as soon as you put that idea out there and someone picks it up, it's no longer your idea, or at least not entirely yours. It's become, and so So, and that to me has really helped, like, just thinking like, you know, I'm not the owner per se of
Hmm.
this. I really just want to get this out there and encourage people to
Yeah.
try it out and make it their own, and
Hmm.
expect that it's going to look different than I
And you
anticipate.
thought,
Yeah.
yeah. That seems really, really important. And I'm so happy that you just brought this point up, because some of the things I do hear folks talk about is like they come up with an idea and they get really excited about that, they think they've got this kind of clever or novel solution to something. They might feel protective of it. They might even want to kind of keep it secret, like it's some secret sauce, a little bit
Hmm.
in some sort of a
Hmm.
way. But I think I hear you saying almost the opposite of that. Like, I have an idea, but I don't really know exactly how this might meet needs for people. So I think about this as, I'll put it out there and then let people tell me
Hmm.
what's
Hmm.
helpful, what's useful, and where's the value in this for them. And so then it evolves as a shared process between you and the users. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's I mean, that even kind of connects to kind of the some of the work that I'm doing now is kind of an impact through innovation fellow, kind of, because one of the things that I've heard kind of over the years is that so a lot of librarians, when they think and talk about this, it's not just focused on physical activity. They're also interested in food and gardening and checking out seeds and getting people seeds to grow their food and teach people how to garden and grow food and distribute summer meals. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just yeah, so the food piece in particular was, I kept hearing back, like, as people talked about this and described it, they were talking about it, it's not just focused on physical activity, it's more broadly focused on promoting healthy living and healthy
Right.
lifestyles, with food as a big part of that. But it was, but they, yeah, I mean, that directly came as a result of kind of putting something out there, and then kind of hearing back in different ways. Librarians tell me, you're not quite understanding exactly what we're doing here. We're interested in physical activity and getting people moving, but we're, it's part of kind of a more,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I guess you would say holistic
Mm-hmm.
promotion of healthy lifestyles.
So now you're adding pieces to this initiative around food, nutrition,
Yeah,
gardening.
food, nutrition, and hopefully, yeah. So that's the kind of the first stage of this rollout, and then my hope is that as people get comfortable with that, to expand it even further, to talk
Mm-hmm.
about some of the mental health type things that are occurring with
Mm-hmm.
social work student interns and libraries and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Emotional.
I think rushing into that too quickly, I think, would be a little bit disorienting.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
food is a natural kind of add-on, especially because a
Yeah.
lot of the initiatives already have kind of food components to them, especially gardening and checking out seeds and things like
Hmm.
that.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. You can do that, huh? You can check out seeds and
Yeah,
plant your
yeah,
own.
that's, I mean, that I love, that's such a, and that's a, and I love the way that it kind of builds on tradition too, because a lot of libraries are actually repurposing their old card catalogs. So that a lot librarians discovered that card catalogs are the perfect size to have seed packets.
Really?
Yeah, so one I have some photos I could share with you, but and West Jefferson and North Wilkesboro, both of those libraries have kind of basically just transformed their old card catalog, which is now completely empty.
Yeah.
And they're basically full of seeds now that the people can check out. And
Yeah.
with the pandemic, with the libraries being closed, a lot of libraries have actually like they'll mail seeds out to people. So, or some libraries have done, like, they just took all their seeds and put them on the curb basically, and said these are available on a first come, because I mean,
That's
they're
awesome.
doing no good, just kind of locked away in the library.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So trying to get them out to people that are trying to get their gardens going this spring.
Yeah. So, if I go back to that high level, I think I hear you saying that to really let these initiatives expand and become all that they can be, it's really important to have this attitude that I'm not the only one driving
Hmm.
this, right?
Yeah.
It's my idea perhaps to start it, but it isn't necessarily, I don't control how this thing will live, how it will grow, what it will become, but you utilize the voices of the people that you're trying to serve to tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems
Yeah,
like
absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I mean, this is kind of like, I mean, I think it is a theoretical process too. I mean, I think a lot about Mikhail Bakhtin, who's kind of a literary theorist, talks a lot about dialogism and kind of the dialogic process between the reader and the writer. And so anyway, there's a lot of things from kind of literary theory that are kind
yeah.
of weaved into my
Yeah,
process.
yeah. But that's really how, but I love hearing about that because having that sort of philosophical, theoretical frame, it sounds like it allows you to kind of relax
Hmm.
about what's coming back to me is, oh, this is what people are saying would be helpful now. I
Hmm.
thought it might be this, but actually it's more this.
Hmm.
So let's go where the energy is and do that. Let's bring that
Hmm.
into it. So it continues to be this, let it grow naturally based on what's helpful at the time.
Yeah.
And versus holding on rigidly to what you believe your vision is supposed to be or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I would just add just one other piece is that I do kind of have some a vision that I've been kind of trying to push, but not push too not push so hard that people kind of get turned off. I mean, I've always had this passion for kind of healthy aging and promoting healthy aging. And so initially, what I was hearing was that there was a huge amount of energy and kind of things involving children and youth services and let's get kids garden and whatnot. And that continues, but I've always been kind of just in the back of my mind, making sure like let's not forget about older adults, and
Mm-hmm.
let's make sure we also talk about how libraries promote healthy aging, and making sure that that's been part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that's I mean that's kind of my uh, agenda. But I guess I mean, if again, like if I were to say like this is exclusively about healthy aging and libraries, similar to say this is exclusively about yoga and libraries, I think I would have
Mm-hmm.
put myself into too narrow of a
Too
box
narrow
of
of a box. Yes.
getting people
Yes.
excited and engaged.
Right. Right. Well, as we kind of reach the end of closer to the end of our time, do you have thoughts? I mean, you shared one about the gardening nutrition, but do you have thoughts about what the future of this initiative might look like? I realize you don't know for sure, but like as the person who started it, do you have sort of this grand vision or hope for how this will continue to grow?
Yeah, I would say probably the thing that I've been most interested in and kind of thinking about and is thinking about how can this so let me just back up. So this whole initiative started with kind of thinking about so here's individual libraries and in different parts of the country doing innovative things. How can we connect
Mhm,
them together and support them
mhm,
and get more libraries engaged and involved in doing this? And so it essentially was looking at kind of how do we transcend individual silos and build community. But now, as I've been doing this for a while, I've been thinking about librarianship in and of itself as kind of a silo. And so what are the things that we can do to get out of the silo of libraries, and think about how can we integrate librarianship and public librarianship into kind of the broader public health space. And so thinking about a lot of the interesting and kind of very parallel initiatives that are happening in parks and recreation and public health. There's a big focus on multi-sectoral coalitions, a whole framework from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation
mhm,
about kind of weaving together faith-based institutions, schools, parks,
mhm,
and really thinking about so how do we move what's happening in libraries and kind of connect it more broadly to this broader kind of multi-sectoral public health
mhm.
development that's kind of so that's I mean that's kind of my grand vision to kind of really integrate this into yeah the more trying to think of the right integrated into public health more explicitly. And so it's not just something that's happening in libraries kind of
Yeah.
alone, but it's kind of part of a much more coherent, multi-sectoral policy and research apparatus.
Mhm, mhm. That's fascinating. It made me think, and I don't know if this is the way you would say it, but like conceptually, if librarians may over time need to think of themselves as less about being connected to this physical building that's called the library
Mm-hmm.
but more
Mm-hmm.
that a library is a set of ways of thinking and resources and knowledge bases that
Yeah.
can be taken, applied to lots of different contexts.
Yes.
And
Yes. Exactly.
that's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And during, I mean, if nothing else has come out of this COVID-19 pandemic, that has come through so forcefully. I mean, there's so many libraries across the country. You go to the websites, and the first thing it says is the library building is closed, but the library remains open.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
so one of the things that librarians are discovering, if they didn't already know this, and I think a lot of them already knew this, but people outside of libraries are discovering that the library is much more than kind of its physical facility. And obviously that facility is vitally important. I mean, it's a
Mhm,
safe place. It's a place for people to gather and try new things and learn new things. But the library as an infrastructure is so much broader than
mhm,
that. And I think with COVID-19, with library buildings being closed, I think the kind of that kind of idea of the library is something that transcends its physical space
mhm,
is really
mhm.
just accelerating. And yeah, and librarians are discovering kind of all that they can do to stay connected with their communities, even if the building's closed.
Yep. It's sort of the library without walls kind of
Hmm.
idea. Huh? Yeah.
Hmm.
Love it. Okay. Well, last question. And if nothing comes to mind, as always, don't worry about it. But if you were talking to let's say a new assistant professor that they had, maybe some interest in possibly doing some innovation work, but they're in that sort of still their formation, thinking through what am I trying to do here. Now I know they've got to have their own disciplinary expertise and
Hmm.
come up with the technical parts of this.
Hmm.
But if you were say like, here's some things that I've learned from my work in this space that I would share with you, some things to keep in mind, some things to avoid. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but does anything come to mind?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, one thing that I would recommend, just thinking about is really just ensuring that you've thought through kind of how research is going to fit into this, because that's, I mean, for me, like this is just like I've always been. I mean, I've been writing pretty consistently throughout this whole process. And so for me, it wasn't an issue kind of making sure that there were research products emanating from this, and that the whole initiative fed into my research. Like I did a study last spring where I used the network that I had kind of formed to recruit participants for this video-based exercise program for older adults in public libraries. But so yeah, I mean, so I had kind of a fairly explicit idea of this is supporting and connecting to my research, and so I would just encourage to make sure that anyone, especially an assistant professor who's thinking about doing this work, has some plans in place to make sure that it supports their research and doesn't detract from it. Because I
Very
think
good.
that's the ideal case, is that this builds into your research. It doesn't, yeah, it's not kind of just it's not, yeah. I mean, I always wonder, like, I mean, we have these research, teaching, service, community engagement, and I've always struggled with how do we position this? Because for me, it's always been research slash community engagement, and perhaps a little bit of service as well. But I see services anyway. But it's just, but yeah, I would definitely make sure that you have a research component to whatever you're doing.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really important question that you're raising. If you look at the UNCG promotion and tenure guidelines, the university-wide ones,
Mm-hmm.
where they talk about research, they talk about research and innovation
Mm-hmm.
as the work that UNCG faculty should be doing. So it's sort of like we do the research, but there's also like, how do we make something new? How do we
Mm-hmm.
translate what we're doing out into the world in a way that
Mm-hmm.
helps the end user? But I think you're right. There's some conversation between those two, right? How does the research support the innovation? How does the innovation support the research, so that they don't stand alone? Maybe would be
Mm-hmm.
something for someone to think about. Is that what you're sort of pointing out?
They don't stand alone. I mean, I'm always interested in kind of how do we bring together different pieces.
Mhm.
And so that's, yeah, just I've always thought about that. And I would also just encourage someone to really just be writing constantly. I mean,
Yeah,
I've always been an avid writer, and like I've just been, whatever I'm doing, I try to sit down and write and think
yeah,
about through writing.
yeah.
And so I would encourage someone to, even as maybe just as simple as kind of like keep a journal or a diary
Mm,
or blog. Blogging could be, I mean, just kind of like, because I really think the more that you're writing, the more those kind of like micro thoughts are kind of like those daily journal entries. Those will lead up into something that could become a journal article. It could
mm,
be kind of the seeds of a more in-depth research but I think kind of that kind of practice of ongoing reflection is really, really vital as well, so that you're not just
mm.
kind of so immersed in the doing that you're not kind of thinking about what's happening and why.
That's a really good piece of advice. So keep that all along the process of innovation is writing about what's happening
Hmm.
because you don't know what that might lead you to in terms of other
Yeah.
research articles and ideas. Great,
Hmm.
super helpful. All right, well, I tell you what, I'm going to pause this recording for just a second.